You're listening to SEN Insight, powered by Rubric. Each episode, we dive into the big ideas, challenges, and stories shaping student experience across campus. Today, on the second episode of SEN Insight, we're diving into recent changes to SSAF, the Student Services and Amenities Fee, and exploring what these changes mean for Australian student unions and campus activities, with David from QUT Guild and Mark from the University of Newcastle Student Association. Let's start with a quick intro from each of them.
Hi, I am David Sims. I am the General Manager at QUT Guild. Been here for about 18 months now.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. And Mark, yourself?
Mark Travaskas. I'm the CEO at UNSA, which is the University of Newcastle Student Association. And I've been in the chair for a bit over 8 months now.
Fabulous. So both still reasonably fresh to your respective organisations and roles. So, what do you think, briefly explain to people that might be outside viewing this from the outside, what is SSAF and what does it bring? Why is it so crucial for student-led organisations?
I can take this one. Yeah, it's probably one of the easier ones of the podcast, so I'll start with that. So SSAF, which to give it its full title is the Student Services and Amenities Fee, is a government regulated fee that universities in Australia can charge their students to fund all of the non-academic services and amenities that they need to have a successful university experience. And in terms of why it's so crucial for student-led organisations, I think SSAF's a critical funding source for the majority of student guilds and unions around Australia. And it enables them to deliver essential services such as the student advocacy and the legal support that we can provide, but also in terms of running the clubs and societies, running the events that students want to go to, the welfare programs, and also supporting student representation. I think without that SSAF funding, many of the student-led organisations around Australia or the student-focused services wouldn't be sustainable, or they would be significantly reduced.
Thanks, David. That's great. And Mark, do you just want to fill us in a little bit about the background as to what's changed over the last 12, 18 months with regards to SSAF funding for student-led organisations, just to set the context really for our discussions today?
Absolutely. So there was legislation passed in November last year. Broadly, they talk about it, calling it a university accords, that sort of language. But look, the headline item is that 40% of the SSAF fee should be allocated to student-led organisations. So that's a fair proportion of the dollars.
Yep.
And these organisations obviously need to be able to demonstrate a maturity and a capacity to govern and deliver services based on those funds as well. So it's a combination of, you've got a block of money that's available for student-led associations, and you need to have reasonable governance and capacity to manage that in order to be eligible. So once that was passed, there's obviously been a transition period where universities and student associations have been asked to negotiate or engage in conversation around how that fee is transferred over to the student association.
Fantastic. And what defines, in your mind, a student-led organisation or association as opposed to just a bunch of students that the university is engaging in a consultative process? What's the difference from your perspective? Yes?
I think a large part of it has got to do with formalised governance structures and the things that go into that. So things like constitutions, records of meetings, appropriate business plans, audited financials, all of the bits and bobs that goes into running sometimes it's a small or even a medium-sized enterprise. So it needs those particular governance structures to be very technical, to be student-led. You need to have a board that has the majority of students on there. So for UNSA, as an example, we have a 9-person board. 6 of those are students who are democratically elected by the students at the campus, and the remaining 3 positions are appointed by the board themselves, and they're independent directors, and we have them there in order to provide some stability, some maturity, some business expertise, as well as a level of continuity across a number of years.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. And David, what's your situation with regards to governance and percentage on board?
Yeah, we have a majority student board, and we then also have the Student Representative Council. Those roles, they're all democratically elected, so all students can engage in those elections to choose their representatives. And one of the most important components of this is that the organisations are independent from the universities themselves, and that they are student-led. And that's very much at the heart of the guilds and the unions around Australia in terms of ensuring that students are making decisions, and they are best placed to make those decisions about what is best for them in terms of the student experience that they wish to have when they're at university.
Fabulous.
Yeah.
Fabulous. Recently, we have been supporting you gents and a few others in an initiative whereby we're surveying the members regarding the SAF allocations, and specifically around transition plans, because as you touched on before, the new legislation allows for transition period to get to the 40% of payment. So I'll ask you first, David. What prompted the Student Guild to initiate the survey, and was there a particular trend or incident or behaviour that's prompted your action?
Yeah, well, as Mark was saying, there was the Accords review, and that made the recommendation for the 40% to be redirected to student-led organisations, and the recommendation was really focused on enhancing the long-term sustainability and the independence of those institutions. But there was also the principle that through this there would be greater collaboration between the universities and the student-led organisations, and unfortunately for many of us that hasn't necessarily been the case. I recognise that sort of shifting that amount of funding from the university to a student-led organisation is quite a shift for how services are delivered and by whom. And we really recognised that in advance of the legislation being passed, and we sought to engage with our counterparts at the university to have strategic conversations, to talk about what genuine partnership looks like, with the sort of aim of ensuring that the transition is as smooth as possible. And unfortunately, we haven't had the opportunity to engage in that strategic dialogue with the university. And as you mentioned, the Department of Education did give universities that genuinely couldn't comply with the legislation by January the 1st, 2025, the opportunity to apply for a transition period. And that could be up to about 3 years. And as a guild, we hoped and expected to be engaged in a conversation about those transition plans, what would go into the plan and be presented to the department, but also how do we work together to improve, as Mark was saying, the sort of the governance, the finances, to ensure that the university is comfortable with transitioning into this new way of working. And again, unfortunately, we haven't been consulted, and there's been a real limited amount of collaboration between ourselves and the university to develop those transition plans. And after its submission, we also asked if we could see that transition plan, and that was refused. And ultimately, we used the Freedom of Information Act to actually gain access to the transition plan. And in that transition plan, there was information put forward that we felt as a guild misrepresented the way that we worked, and that was either through a lack of understanding or a lack of engagement between the university and ourselves. And I think what it speaks to is a real need for the higher education institutes and the guilds to get together in a room to really understand what the requirements are, to understand the status of each of the organisations and how we can best move forward together. And in part, this survey is born out of that experience and the frustration that we could be achieving much greater levels of impact if there was this collaboration and communication between the universities and their student-led organisations.
Thanks, David. Mark, you've had different difficulties, would you say?
Yeah, very much so. But firstly, I want to just back up with David and just say there are a lot of similarities between our institution and yours. I agree that the universities have an opportunity to engage in a much more sophisticated conversation with the various guilds or associations. Our experience, and it certainly is a deeper personal experience for me, having been in my role for 8 months and being new to the sector as well. My experience has been one of the university acting in a transactional manner as opposed to being a transitional manner. Equally, or very similar to what David said, we were aware that there was a transition plan in place. We had repeatedly asked for a copy of that transition plan, and we have been thus far unsuccessful. And indeed, when we actually pushed even further and asked if they were aware that they had a new transition plan requirement for 30 June this year, it really felt that the university was very late out of the blocks in terms of preparation. And even at the time of recording this podcast, we had not yet been effectively consulted on that plan, nor have we seen anything in writing. There's still a couple of more days to go, I dare say, in the month, but it's a good example of a lack of engagement. The transitional versus transactional for us, and again, David was talking about the idea of moving an amount of money. Our experience has been that the university has sought to find a program or some block of money, a line item, so to speak, and to simply move that operational budget over to our organisation with very little additional consideration of things like on costs or CPI, or indeed the process of transitioning these programs. And I also need to recognise that I need to be gracious as well. The university does have a challenge in here, as in some of these dollars or some of these programs are attached to programs that have employees and existing structures as well. So there is a HR element that the university does need to take into account. But again, I come back to that phrase, transactional versus transitional. One could plan this out, one could structure it over time so that it is effectively done.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I'm imagining that some of these programs would sit well with the student guild, student union anyway, and might just as easily be delivered through your services than theirs. So it wouldn't necessarily be a bad thing if dealt with in a more collaborative manner, possibly.
Absolutely.
So is this a trend across the thing? Are there good examples of good transition happening going on?
Yeah, I think from speaking with other general managers and CEOs across the sector, I think the experiences that Mark and I have just described are common amongst some of us, but I also think that there are universities that are engaging in a much more positive manner with their student-led organisations. And I think this survey seeks to shine a light on those that are doing it well, as well as those that potentially aren't. And this isn't about creating a Christmas in July naughty and nice list, but it's more about highlighting what's working well and what's not, and to provide recommendations to the Department of Education about how they can verify and monitor how the accords are being implemented, but also then to provide recommendations to higher education providers to support better engagement with their student-led organisations in the immediate term, but also well into the future as well.
Right. Thanks for that. So what are your hopes for the survey? Was it you're hoping to find? What is it you're hoping to do with it?
I think one of the things I'm looking for out of this survey is a nice bit of evidence-based practice that allows us to show not only the experience of a variety, but as David said, be able to highlight the good and the examples of great practice, as well as to highlight the areas where we struggle and to see if there's commonality across that. The reality is that while student associations may all appear to be similar on the surface level, the moment you scratch it, you realise that there are different governance structures, there are different retail structures, there are different funding structures, and we're actually quite complex and diverse underneath. So I'm hoping that this will give some light to those differences and the impact that these relationships with the universities have.
Yeah, great. And can either of you share some real world examples of how the lack of transparency in the process has or might impact student-led initiatives?
Well, I think from my perspective, well, in all forms of business, the more accurate the data you have, the better you can plan, the better you can strategize, and ultimately deliver for your customers or for your stakeholders, which are the students in the higher education institutes, and we want to be able to develop long-term strategies that respond to the changing nature of the sector, but also prepare students for future success. And it's all of this is occurring in a rapidly changing world, and the lack of transparency in terms of funding or resourcing or the relationship that we have with the university really means that it's quite difficult to plan beyond 6 month to 1 year horizons. And it also means that it's really difficult to invest for the future. So at QUT Guild, we run some really critical services such as the food bank, which is responding to the cost of living crisis. We also run all of the student advocacy, supporting students to ensure that they can continue achieving academic success. And all of these are free services, but they're also services where demand is outstripping supply. And we recognise that students are facing multiple pressures within the university, externally, and we want to continue supporting them. But without the sort of long-term consistent, or without the long-term understanding of the funding that we'll be receiving, it's very difficult to scale up those sorts of programs, ensure that we can offer them consistently, but then also expand them or adapt them to meet the ever-growing and shifting needs of what is a really diverse student population. And so for me, that's one of the biggest challenges as a general manager at the Guild, is getting the level of certainty around the funding into the future so that we can provide those services in exactly the manner and at the scale that students within QUT need it.
Fantastic. Mark, anything you'd like to add to that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think getting this funding model right not only gives us a level of, I suppose, sustainability regarding ongoing income, etc., but it also opens the door to allowing organisations such as ours to develop really comprehensive strategic plans that go beyond 12 months. At the moment, I'm currently looking at what's next year's budget going to look like, and I don't know the answer to that question. And we're heading into August, and I'd like to be able to have as much lead time in that as possible. But more importantly, where is the organisation going to be in 2 and 3 years' time, and how do we do the building blocks now to move us towards that? So whether that's staff succession planning, whether that is building relationships with external providers, whether it's building a particular retail arm or something like that, they're the things that as a CEO, that's where my head sits. Where are we going to be in 3 years' time? Where are we going to be in 4 years' time? And how do I get there? At the moment, I don't know, because I'm not clear about what the funding model is going to look like, and there is a lack of transparency and collaboration on that.
Yeah, that's tough. That's tough, definitely. What do you think the government could have done differently in writing the legislation? Because from my perspective, having fed into the process with the Department of Education, there was considerable level of consultation that went into it, and promises made, if you like, around what the legislation would look like. And in the end, it felt well short of that and rushed. So what do you think they could have done differently?
I think with any change process, you have to look at building relationships and setting some standards, as well as providing a bit of guidance regarding the outcome expectations. So a good example is that when UNSA undertook our business planning models for this year, we sat in the room with our university stakeholders for a good part of the time to share our knowledge, to share our experience, and to come to that combined view as to where we could go forward. And I think the government would have had an opportunity to do a little bit of that groundwork about building relationships and managing expectations through that process. So that's me being positive in terms of that. I also think that there needed to be, or there possibly could have been, a greater level of accountability regarding the development of the plans. I mean, when you look at the plans and the way that they are actually reported, there's approximately 6 ticker boxes that need to be filled in that really lack the depth of understanding that ensures that the legislation and the spirit of the legislation was being adhered to. So I think there's at least 2 things that could have been done differently.
I think you're spot on. I think the timing and also the sequencing of how the legislation was brought in and then sort of the operational components of that brought in afterwards, the timing was quite mixed up in terms of we need this enacted on the 1st of January 2025, but then we're applying for transition plans later down the track that potentially are not going to be approved until halfway through that year. So a lot of that sequencing could have been stronger. I think there's also an element there in terms of prior to approval of transition plans, whether there is the opportunity to verify and actually engage with the guild to understand it from their perspective. I think there has been a sort of take it on face value approach from the Department of Education when signing off on these transition plans. And I think therefore it could have been actually what would have been beneficial was a sort of tripartite arrangement in which we all engage in that conversation. And again, it speaks to the principles of collaboration and transparency and ensuring that we're all on the same page and we're all moving forward, because essentially we have the same strategic objectives in terms of
absolutely
the student experience.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, let me ask you a new question then. I'm long in the tooth when it comes to this sector, having joined student unions and the tertiary sector back in 2003. You guys are, dare I say, noobs by that comparison. So I'd be interested in your take on what do you think is the underlying problem between the student unions, associations, guilds, and their relationship with the universities? Because you do see good examples of great collaboration between university and guild, where the university understands and respects the place of its student association. But historically, there has often been a lack of collaboration, lack of understanding, lack of trust between the two organizations, and ultimately it's the student that suffers in that. So I'd be interested to hear your relatively new perspective on what do you think is underlying that.
I think so. Just as background, like my work prior to this, I used to work in large international NGOs, and the way that they work is that we receive funding from government, and the government seeks to have as much of that money in the hands of local organizations or communities that have been impacted by a disaster. Now, the in between those two organizations, there are very different risk appetites and bureaucracies to support them. And when I first came into the sector, I thought I was going to be a fish out of water. But when I sat down with the registrar and suddenly started to look at it from the perspective of, okay, you've got a large institution, the university, with money that they want to put in the hands of students, they need to have an intermediary that can support those students in terms of their governance, their risk management, and their financial management. And so when I came into the sector, and you're looking at these large risk-averse institutions such as the university, you've got students that are really pushing the envelope in terms of what they want to do to fight for student rights, advocate for change, both within the higher education sector, but also more globally. You need to have organisations that can support looking one way towards the university and looking the other way. So I actually felt like it was quite a similar construct. And I think like universities are risk averse, they're conservative, and rightly so. They're massive, visible institutions within the public eye, and they need to focus on things like governance, risk, and finance. And I think some within the universities are worried that those sorts of issues are not necessarily the focus of students. So they have those concerns. But I think if they are the concerns, what we need to be doing is being very transparent, putting those on the table and having open discussions about how we can resolve them. I think some of those concerns also come about because of the unique environment that we're working in. Certainly for the QUT Guild, there is a naturally high turnover because we have elections each year. and those student leaders are democratically elected. So we have that level of turnover that requires strong relationships to be built quickly. But there's also a significant power imbalance that impacts on young leaders' ability to operate confidently within these massive bureaucratic structures. And I think when university staff, when they're seeing students in those spaces and they're not able to answer certain questions, they start to feel less confident about the capacity of the guild. So I think the risk aversion and some of those unique environmental elements come together and cause concerns.
Yeah,
we can resolve those by continuous dialogue, conversation, addressing power imbalances, building genuine partnerships, so on and so forth. I think there are also financial pressures that universities are experiencing. We're all facing inflationary pressures. There was all of the issues in relation to international student caps, which impact on the finances of universities, that also get brought into the mix here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You make a good point. You're absolutely right. If you're a university that's had free reign over their SAF funds since 2011, and they're now being told, well, actually 40% of that needs to go to a student-led organisation, and they've not been paying anywhere near that amount, that can be a large chunk of change to lose in a relatively short period when you've been using it to fund services, rightly or wrongly, that might be seen as core services that you've got to continue to fund afterwards. Mark, coming across to you, do you have similar experience, similar views?
Yeah, very much so. Slightly different language. I think there's a bit of perspective on what the dollars actually are and what they mean. So for ANSA, we know that the total 40% allocation of SAF fees equates to something like 0.5% of the university's actual budget. So it's a very small amount of money for the university. However, for ANSA, it's in excess of 95% of our income. So when David talks about that power imbalance, there's a financial perspective that is certainly relevant here. The other thing is that we've got a university. I mean, our university has 2,500-3,000 staff, so they are a juggernaut of a business. They do a lot, not only in terms of education but also broader engagement. Our organisation is a tiny little not-for-profit. It's almost like a neighbourhood centre operating on campus. So you've got a different mindset in terms of the how do you manage a business? How do you manage a business with 15 to 25 employees is vastly different to an organisation that's 1,000 times that size. The other thing that I suppose really stands out to me is the notion of management experience. A lot of organisations, a lot of universities perhaps confuse the idea of a student-led organisation as opposed to a student-managed organisation. And our organisation is definitely not a student-managed organisation. We have a professional management team with the appropriate qualifications. David, much like you, I come from the not-for-profit sector. I've been an operations manager and a CEO of a range of not-for-profit organisations over the past 10 to 12 years. And as such, I bring that experience to the table. I think what confuses the university is that occasionally you'll have the student factor pop up, and because of that student factor, it confuses or it taints the relationship with the university. I think the last part of it is actually got to do with just change in and of itself. I think a large ship like the university takes a long time to pivot. Meanwhile, you look at an organisation like ANSA, and if we need to throw together an event for tomorrow afternoon, I'm pretty much sure I could do it. So it's about a lot of factors in there. I certainly think that there is goodwill on behalf of most of the university staff. And I think it's a case of wanting the best for everyone. That said, I think that all of those factors cloud the actual outcome where we're trying to get to.
Yeah, great. Thank you both. That's insightful. What changes would you like to see in how are negotiated and allocated?
From my perspective, I think the first step is for universities to really lean into those principles of the legislation in terms of collaborating with their student-led organisations in a manner that achieves collective strategic goals. I would like to see that through that students are put in charge of the resources and the services that they need to best support their own university experience. And we've used the language of nothing about us without us when we're talking to the university. We need to see greater levels of collaboration and transparent dialogue. We need to see us addressing the power imbalances and engaging in genuine partnership. And we really want to see universities recognising that supporting student-led organisations to flourish will ultimately create a better university experience, and it's a win-win for all of us.
Yeah.
I think student associations need to take on a bit of responsibility to remove some of the issues around governance and management. And I talk from experience of looking at benchmarking accreditation across organisations. So I think student associations should be willing to engage in a process whereby we are happy to have someone go through and have a conversation with us from an independent perspective to remove that particular governance and management issue off the table. I think once we get that removed, it really will allow us to start talking on a much more level playing field.
Yeah, that's a good point, and something that we'll be discussing in future podcasts, because we've got a project coming up with some external consultants to look at governance across the sector, almost like a State of the Union report, to see how, because like you both have highlighted, we've got such a diverse set of organisations that deliver student experience across the sector, all with different governance structures, and that we're going to try and compare that to a more mature view of what's going on in the UK, because it's been 20 years nearly now since the Charities Commission in the UK forced change in governance on student unions in the United Kingdom, and it'd be interesting to compare what our various structures doing and what the gaps might be that help build that trust that the universities can then view our members more strategically, possibly. So what are your plans once we get the survey back? What do you hope to do? Is it go back to the university? Is it go back to the department? What are your thoughts?
Well, so just as a small plug, the survey is still open until the 8th of August. So if you're listening to this and you haven't already completed it, please do jump onto the survey or contact SEN to get the link. It takes about 15 minutes to complete, and we're essentially going to use that survey initially to identify where things are working well, where things aren't, to start to flesh those out with a few case studies, and then we'll develop a range of recommendations. And the proposition is that we pull that all together into a paper, have that reviewed across the sector, and then we will make that publicly available, so unions and guilds can use that for their own individual advocacy and engagement with their own universities, but also in terms of our collective engagement, in terms of engaging with the Department of Education and having conversations across the spectrum. I think there's a range of different stakeholders involved in this, and I think if we can all learn from this and continuously improve the way that we engage together, that would be the most positive outcome from my perspective.
I think you hit it on the head, David. I think it is about sharing it amongst the various organisations, sharing it with the university, sharing it with the Department of Education, all with the intent of trying to improve the outcome for all parties that are involved.
Yeah, great. I think it's worth me asking the question. You're going through this experience because you're student associations, guilds, unions, and part of that is having elected officers as part of your governance structure. Do you see them having a place in the review of this and how it can be advocated moving forward?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Go for it, Mark.
So I readily engage with both my board members and our SRC regarding our SAF transition plans, what we'd like to do, and also what we'd like to contribute into the future. I love that phrase, nothing about us without us, simply because it really is about listening to our students, taking their advice and guidance on where they see the issues are, and then working alongside them to help them achieve positive outcomes. it goes across the board, whether you're serving sausages or whether you're dealing with contracts.
Our president is leading this project, and I'm supporting with this component of it. And she's also speaking with other presidents across different universities, and also engaging with the NUS as well. And so there's a lot of student engagement. They feel very passionate about this, and they're really driving all of the work that we're doing.
Fantastic. Okay, just to finish off then, if you could have one request or one change you'd like to see between yourselves and your university administrators, senior administrators, what would it be?
Consistency. I think stability, consistency, and working towards a really strong, agreed, structured plan would be fantastic. And by consistency, I mean, yes, meeting face to face. I also think in terms of the level of decision making, the level of outcome desire, I think that is by far, for us, going to be one of the better outcomes to help us move it forward.
Fantastic. David?
I think the first thing I've learned is always try and get in before Mark comes up with the strongest answer. So following on from that, I think for me, the starting point for this conversation with universities is recognizing that independent and financially sustainable student-led organisations are critical to ensuring that students have a great university experience. And I think if universities can acknowledge that those organisations need to be resourced and they need to develop meaningful ways to collaborate with student leaders, then it's going to become a win-win for all of us. And most importantly, it's going to be a win for the students. And that's ultimately why we're all here.
Yeah, that's great. And I think I would just add there's some really great examples of how universities and student unions are collaborating to make a significant impact on the student journey. And my message to the administrators would be: it's legislated, it's here, just embrace it, work with it, make the best of it, find ways to find synergies and build together rather than fight this, because it's not going away. The feedback we've had from the Department of Education is very much in support of the legislation. They know what the intent was, even if it isn't being written very well. They still want to push down that route, and I know that NUS, having spoken to them, they're not going to let this go, because they were a significant part of a core process that led to these changes. So it's not going away. Let's get on board and get with it. Fabulous. Well, listen, thank you both for your time today. This has been fantastic from my perspective. Congratulations, both of you. First podcast for the SEN Insights program. And thank you for your time today, and good luck with the survey. Hopefully we can be here maybe 6 months' time reviewing the outcomes and how well it went.
Thanks, Paul, and thanks so much for your support as well.